Brat is overrated and people only like the aesthetic. I've asked you to send in your most controversial music opinions and I'm going to respond to them right now. And there are some real spicy takes here. First up, if you like my reactions and my takes on pop music, you can follow me, subscribe right here, and you can also join my Discord, which I'll link below. That's where I talk about pop music with a lot of other pop fans on the daily, and I think that you would love it there. It's also where I've got a few of these hot takes from, and I'm excited to get into it. I'm just going to go through them one by one and give you my opinions on them, say if I agree with them, say if I really disagree with them, and I really disagree with a couple of them. There are takes on Sabrina Carpenter, Charli XCX, of course Taylor Swift. Let's start. So the first one I've got here is Espresso and Please 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 were overrated and didn't deserve chart-topping performances, and Taste was the best of the three. Here's my opinion on this. I don't agree with it because I personally think that Please 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 is the best song of the three, and I really, really liked that really showcased her songwriting in a different way. I think that Espresso deserved to be a smash. It's like cheeky and fun and charismatic, and it came at the perfect time just as things were warming up and really just like got into the zeitgeist for summer. Taste, I think, is perhaps the most impressive of the three because it was so unbelievable that she could lodge three very different sounding hits from the same album. And Taste, to me, is kind of the most daring. It's the one that immediately didn't strike me as having like a super, super memorable chorus. But as I've stuck with it, I've just got more and more into it. And now I just think that Taste is incredible, to be honest. So to be honest, I think they all satisfy different parts, and I don't think that any of them is really rising a lot above the other. The next take is, I don't think Taylor Swift is meeting the current pop culture moment and feels like a rinse and repeat of her previous work. Yes, Eras Tour continues to be wildly successful. TTPD did record numbers, but in my opinion, it hasn't penetrated beyond her existing fandom. It's a very interesting time right now for Taylor Swift, I think. You just cannot deny that she is the biggest pop star on earth right now, numbers-wise. She's coming off the back of a hugely successful tour. I think will go down as being one of the most, if not the greatest pop tour of all time. And as I'm recording this, the Tortured Poets Department is spending like, I don't know, a 19th week at number one or something like that. So just a massive year for her. But is she meeting the pop culture moment? This is interesting because for the first time in a couple of albums, I feel like the Tortured Poets Department is not reaching anybody outside of the Swiftie fandom. And here's why I think this. One, because none of the singles have managed to grab on. And if she is as big as she is outside of the fandom, she should very comfortably be able to lodge a single that's as big as like Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter or Birds of a Feather by Billie Eilish or Die With a Smile. But she just wasn't off this album, and that has a little bit to do with the fact that this album is a little bit more challenging in sound. It goes into the commercial pop sound less than her other albums did, but it shows to me that the Swiftie fandom has gotten so big that they are able to take a project like the Tortured Poets Department and give it the numbers of a blockbuster release when maybe when we look outside of the fandom, it's not having the same effect. And I think that that's pretty obvious that compared to Midnight's, which had Anti-Hero and Karma, which were both big hits, this one has kind of failed to reach outside. And I don't think it was necessarily her intention to reach that further outside, but it's just this very interesting, I guess, juxtaposition to have a pop star of her stature kind of on the top of the podium, but then also have an album that if I went outside right now and spoke to people who weren't Swifties, I doubt that they would be able to tell me that much about the album, whereas I think they would be able to tell me a little bit more about Short and Sweet or even Brat as well, and like the cultural moment involving that. So I guess I agree with this to some point. In like 7 years, people will finally get Radical Optimism and love it. Yeah, I mean, part of the response to radical optimism, and I think you can also look at a record like Lord Solar Power, has to do with how beloved the record before was. So Future Nostalgia was such a big album and obviously met the moment in such a special way during the pandemic that it was always going to be really hard for a third album to match that. Radical Optimism hasn't had the hits of Future Nostalgia. Nowhere near. It's really struggled in that regard. And I don't think the album was received that warmly by anybody who wasn't like a hardcore Dua Lipa fan. Me personally, I like Radical Optimism. I think it's fun. I think it's like got this kind of carefree and this like ease to it that's really nice to listen to, but I certainly don't think it's like a profound record and one that hits very hard for anybody. So in terms of people coming back to really love it, I'm not sure if it's daring enough to get that reappraisal later on. It's still a pretty straight down the line pop record. And when I think about the albums that have really like had a renaissance when they were initially trashed, they're albums that did something that was quite daring, quite outside of the box. If you think about Art Pop by Lady Gaga or Bionic by Christina Aguilera, or even Solar Power, they're doing something unique in that. And I think Radical Optimism will just go down as an album that the fandom really like, and that's kind of where it stops. It's going to be very interesting to see what she does next. I find Sabrina's cheekiness irritating. It's a bit of a hot take, I guess. Cheekiness has become Sabrina Carpenter's whole brand this year, and I think has been incredibly successful. If you don't like it, maybe you just don't love what Sabrina Carpenter is all about, because I've been invested in the past 2 projects, Emails I Can't Send, where I came on board, and I found there was a cheekiness about that record and kind of a directness and an unfiltered nature to the lyrics that is what I found very endearing. And she's dialed it up to 10 on Short and Sweet. And I just find that even more endearing, to be honest. The first time I listened to the record, I was so amused by some of the lines that she was saying, by how she was trying to push herself to make herself even more cheekier or even funnier. And yeah, that could be irritating to some people because it is on the nose. But I think that is part of her brand and that is part of her success this year as well. Brat is overrated and people only like the aesthetic. This is a big one, and this is one that keeps coming up time and time again whenever I post a video on Charli XCX. This is kind of the thing that is said by people who don't really love the Brat hype. People love to have a personality put on them. They love to be a part of a movement, and they love to be part of a movement that feels particularly like cool in a way. Like there was something about particularly the start of Brat Summer where it was like attaching yourself to that gave you some kind of personality, some kind of way of life, and also some street cred as well. And I definitely think that that was part of what has pushed Brat from a commercial perspective. Obviously, it's a genius marketing move, but I want to go back to like the Friday that the album dropped, because this wasn't really happening at this point. She'd had several singles from the album so far. There was no indication to me that this was performing better than any of the singles that have come before previous albums. And so I think what started generating the hype for Brat is the quality of the record. I mean, even the album cover when it dropped, people were like, this sucks. There wasn't like this, oh my God, she's a genius, automatically. I think there was this just initial connection to the album amongst fans, and then it started to spread further and further with critics and people outside of the fandom, where people realized that there was something special about this album. There was like a vulnerability. There was something that was energizing about listening to it. And from there, it started to cascade and get bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't necessarily, it was because somebody like just decided that Brat was going to be a thing. Something had to strike the, strike the match. And I think that it was initially the quality of Brat. So when I think that this thing is overrated, yeah, I'm sure that some people are kind of blinded by the aesthetic of all, of course, but I think the initial seed is that Brat is a good album. Next is Gracie Abrams isn't even good. She and her new album is just no. I reacted to the album on the channel. You can go back and see my reaction to it. And I liked some of it and I didn't like some of it. I don't think that there is anything to show that Gracie Abrams is not a good musician. And here's why I'm impressed by her. Like, obviously the Nepo baby criticism, whatever, is going to come, and you've just got to kind of weather that storm. And I think she's weathered it quite well. She's obviously gotten a leg up at several points in her career to get to where she is. But I've been impressed by how she has just kind of steamrolled through it all this year. I think I Love You, I'm Sorry initially started taking off because people on Twitter or X or whatever were like, this is no good. And that was the original viral moment for it. But then she comes through with That's So True. And I think just really like honed in on what people love about her, which is these really kind of youthful lyrics, these bounding bridges, and just like a general, I don't know, not relatability per se, but just like there's something about her that feels very Girl Next Door. And I think that the Gen Z in particular are really gravitating towards that. And the cool thing is that I think she's got a lot of slack for her performance and for her vocals, and some of it is warranted. I haven't always found her to be the most engaging performer, but I watched her on SNL and I was like, wow, she's like taken on all this critique that she's gotten and she's smoothed it all out. And to be honest, I thought that those performances were like pretty spectacular. And so I don't think saying she's not good is completely fair. I do understand how you could find it annoying if you're not totally in on the Gracie Abrams thing. But for me, I'm impressed with how she's handled 2024. Katy Perry album wasn't great, but wasn't awful. I love that this was a hot take. It's not as bad as people say it is. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I've been putting together my list of the worst albums of the year, which always feels like a little bit of a negative and not nice thing to do. And my first reaction was Katy Perry 143 is obviously making the list. And then I thought about it some more and I was like, there wasn't anything particularly bad about this album. The worst part of it was that it was so just like middle of the road and lacking in the certain personality and individuality that we crave from Katy Perry, that it felt boring. And I think because of that, and because of this kind of hate train generated by the producer that she was working with, and also the fact that Woman's World is just a real clunker of a song, it really exacerbated people calling this album absolute trash when it isn't absolute trash. It's just mediocre. So I think I agree with this hot take. Jade has been slept on and her 2 singles should have been smash hits. I mean, yeah, this is the most obvious statement of the year. But what I think is really encouraging about the Jade thing, Angel of My Dreams was a pretty like big hit. It was top 10 in the UK. And then I think Fantasy didn't perform as well. But when we've gotten to the end of year lists, I've seen so many US-centric lists that have Jade Angel of My Dreams on it, which is incredible exposure. And it means that the right people are listening. Like, she's making her way into circles and into pop fan circles that even Little Mix weren't penetrating. So I think we're going to see a big year for Jade next year. 9, the remix album is better than Brat OG. I don't entirely agree with this because I think that Brat as a singular statement is so strong and so cohesive and such a good listen from start to finish. While I think that the remix album is incredibly entertaining and a great side piece to that record, I don't think that it has the same cohesiveness that album has by the simple fact that it's bringing in lots of different guests. I think it works well as a companion piece. I think it's incredible to see how these songs can develop over time. But the Brat as a singular entity, I think is just such a powerful statement. And I don't think that the remix album is able to bring that same kind of power to the table. Ariana wasn't snubbed at the Grammys outside of Best Video category. I mean, I do agree that she absolutely should have got a Best Video nod. She was essentially snubbed in the big categories. So, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Album of the Year, no love for Ariana Grande. And I think that Eternal Sunshine is a pretty strong record, to be honest. I do think in some ways she was snubbed because there are albums that I don't think are as strong as it. I don't think Tortured Poets Department is as strong as it. And I actually think that it is better than Short and Sweet in many ways. So in that way, I think it was actually snubbed. I just think the issue is that the promotion for Wicked kind of took over at a time when the album needed to be generating more and more hype. And instead of that, it just sort of fizzled out. I mean, she tried to launch The Boy Is Mine as a single. It didn't really work. And I think if that song had gotten off the ground in the way that she wanted it to, then it probably would have given a little more heat for Eternal Sunshine to be recognized. But there's a reason why this album keeps getting forgotten in the conversation of why 2024 was so good for pop. And that's just for one reason or another. It wasn't splashy, wasn't flashy enough, and therefore wasn't recognized by the Grammys. Whether that's fair or not is for you to make up your mind on. But I do think that I would have liked to maybe see it with an Album of the Year nomination. I mean, I can see why it wasn't. So I'm kind of lukewarm on her being snubbed. TTPD is one of those albums, hated now, loved in the future. This is the defense that all the fans come up with when an album doesn't kind of get the reception that they wanted it to have. Here's why I don't think this is going to happen, that it's going to be loved by people outside the Swiftie fandom, and that's simply for the fact that it's just too long. Like, over 30 songs is too much for a casual fan to get around, and I don't think we're going to see this huge justice for TTPD thing with the wider public. I will say from a critical appraisal, I do think that is going to change somewhat, because I personally think that there's a very strong record within the tracks. It needed to be edited down, and the anthology, I think, waters it down way too much and just completely dulls the impact of the original songs, which I actually think have some like real merit to them, because for the first time, it feels like Taylor Swift is being, not for the first time perhaps, but it's the most daring she's been with sharing her public life. There's some statements that she made that really like had my jaw drop the first time I listened to it. And I don't know if that's completely been understood by everybody, because even from a critical point of view, when I've listened to critics speak about it or write about it, there is this Taylor Swift fatigue that is just impossible to avoid. She's released so many records in the past couple years, and it means that whatever power that TTPD could have had if it came like 4 years after Midnight's instead of just like 1.5 is lost. And so I do think that there is going to be some kind of critical reappraisal when we get the chance to have some perspective over this period of Taylor Swift. And for me personally, yeah, I think I can see it being in like my top 4 sort of Taylor Swift projects down the line. Yes, and is Ariana's best Eternal Sunshine single? No. We Can't Be Friends is the best single, I think. And the issue with Yes and is it just didn't feel uniquely Ariana for me. Like, obviously it borrows so heavily from a period of Madonna music in terms of the sound of it and its relationship to Vogue. And on top of that, I think that it really takes on the critics in just like a really smoothed over cliche kind of way, and doesn't really have any sort of like, I don't know, there's nothing to me that feels uniquely Ariana about it. Whereas We Can't Be Friends, even though the sound of it is kind of Robin, there's something about the way that she approaches it vocally and the way that she approaches kind of the vulnerability and the gentle nature of the song that is very uniquely Ariana and harks back to a song like Love Me Harder. I don't know, I just don't think Yes and feels Ariana Grande to me. And I know that you can try out a new sound and make it yours, and I think she does that at several points on Eternal Sunshine, but Yes and is not one of them. Love Taylor, but she should not win Album of the Year. Let Charli or Sabrina shine. Yeah, I would be very shocked if Taylor Swift won Album of the Year this year. What the Grammys is meant to do is it's meant to take the temperature on where music is at a certain point in history. You should be able to look back on the nominees for Album of the Year, and particularly the winner, and I think be like, okay, yeah, I get where music was at that point. And to bulldoze over a year where Charli, Sabrina, and Chapel shone so bright with projects that were so different and such breakthroughs for them, I would find it interesting for them not to take it. And then I think the other ones in the conversation is Billie, who I think did something really different with her record, and Beyonce, who did something really different with hers as well. It feels like Taylor's made the least conversation outside of the Swiftie fandom, and for that reason I agree that she shouldn't win Album of the Year. However, you can never be surprised if she does end up taking this award, because she's got it 4 times before. I was really shocked when she got it for Midnights, but I do think Midnights had more of a commercial splash than TTPD has. So I can't see her walking away with the award, and I do think that maybe it will be Charli, Sabrina, Chapel, or Billie's year to take it. However, always rooting for Beyonce to get that award finally. And which takes us on to our next one, which is Cowboy Carter is overrated and not one of Beyonce's best albums. I mean, Beyonce just gets hit with the overrated thing over and over again. And I find that anytime I really push someone on that question and really ask them about it, 9 times out of 10, they haven't really listened to the record. I think that Cowboy Carter is great. I think that it's an incredible exploration in country music. From an educational point of view, it taught me a lot about the genre, but from a Beyonce fan point of view, it taught me a lot about her. And I also got what I want from a Beyonce project, which is to find something daring, to be surprised by it. I mean, the breadth of sounds that she brings in, going from American Requiem to the end where it's more dancey and Two Hands to Heaven and Tyrant and stuff like that, I think is quite phenomenal. And while it probably doesn't rank for me in the top 4 Beyonce projects, that's a damn strong lineup, which is hard to penetrate. So I feel like she did something different. It's a really strong record. And I think that Beyonce is adequately rated. I think that she is a legend. And for somebody to be able to always try something new with some projects, if it misses for you, that's fine. I would rather my fave be trying different things every single time than constantly doing the same thing with diminishing returns. So I'm very happy with Cowboy Carter personally. I think that brings us to the end of my hot takes section for 2024. I actually really enjoyed going through them. I think that it's been such a big year for pop music that there's been so many opinions, and I have loved interacting with all of them. I think that it's been really fun. It's been fun to see people talk about their favorites like Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, and Beyonce alongside these new artists that are developing fan bases or big fan bases for the first time. It's just been a really fun kind of conversational year in pop music, and I'm really excited for another year of it. If you like this kind of stuff, if you like me talking about pop music, reacting to pop music, I would love it if you would hit subscribe, because there's going to be plenty of this in 2025. I really appreciate you watching. Have a happy holidays, and I will see you very soon.